Almeda Johnson, 72 years old, and retired for just 3 years. I spent decades as a high school literature teacher before settling into my quiet life in Portland after my Richard passed away 5 years ago. I always supported my only daughter Kathleen through college, her wedding, and raising my grandchildren. My life felt complete until that Sunday afternoon when Kathleen and her husband James appeared at my doorstep, faces unusually stern, about to change everything. Before I continue my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below, and if this resonates with you, please like and subscribe. I always prided myself on the relationship I had with my daughter Kathleen. From the moment she was born, I devoted myself to being the best mother possible. Even when times were tough, I made sure she never went without. I took on extra tutoring hours after my regular teaching day, grading papers late into the night to afford dance lessons, summer camps, and later the best college we could manage. Richard, my husband, worked tirelessly as a construction contractor, often taking jobs that kept him away for days at a time, all to provide for our little family. Richard was a good man with a big heart, quite literally, as it turned out. His heart gave out suddenly 5 years ago, leaving me alone in our modest 2-bedroom house. The home was paid off, thankfully, and he left me with some savings, not a fortune by any means, but enough that I could finish out my teaching career without immediate financial worry. I retired 3 years ago, settling into a quiet life on my teacher's pension, comfortable but far from luxurious. When Kathleen met James Sullivan 9 years ago, I was thrilled. He seemed ambitious, working as a manager at a local car dealership with plans to eventually own his own business. Their wedding was small but beautiful, and I contributed what I could to give my only daughter the special day she deserved. I remember watching her walk down the aisle, thinking how proud Richard would have been. 3 years later, the twins came along, Jackson and Emma, 2 perfect little bundles who instantly became the center of my world. I rearranged my teaching schedule to help with childcare 3 days a week, saving Kathleen and James the expense of daycare while they built their careers. Kathleen was climbing the corporate ladder at a marketing firm, while James had been promoted to general manager of the dealership. They bought a beautiful home in the suburbs with 4 bedrooms and a backyard with a swing set for the children. From the outside looking in, they were living the American dream. Our Sunday dinners became a sacred tradition. Every week, they would come over after church, the twins, racing through my front door to find what new little surprise I had waiting. I would spend Saturday making Kathleen's favorite pot roast or Richard's special lasagna recipe. We would eat and talk and laugh, and for those few hours each week I felt complete. As the twins grew older, now 6 years old and full of energy, I remained their go-to babysitter. I kept a drawer full of clothes for them, transformed my home office into a playroom, and knew all their favorite books by heart. I attended every T-ball game, school performance, and parent-teacher conference when Kathleen and James were busy with work. I never complained. This was what family meant to me. But over the past year, something began to change. The Sunday dinners became less frequent. Kathleen always had a reason the children had activities. James had work commitments. They were just too exhausted. I understood, of course. Life gets busy, especially with young children and demanding careers. Still, I noticed the shift. Phone calls that once lasted an hour became 5-minute check-ins. When they did visit, Kathleen seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone while James barely engaged in conversation. I told myself not to be that clingy mother-in-law or grandmother who demands attention. I kept my concerns to myself, continuing to offer help whenever needed. When they did need me, usually for last-minute childcare or to pick up the twins from school when both were stuck at work, I was always available, no questions asked. Last Christmas they arrived 2 hours late to dinner and left immediately after opening presents. Emma left her new doll at my house, and when I drove over the next day to return it, I noticed a brand new luxury SUV in their driveway. Kathleen had mentioned wanting one but said they were waiting until they had paid off some debt. I was happy for their success, but confused by the mixed messages about their financial situation. Still, I never questioned them directly. In my generation, we were taught not to pry into financial matters, even with our own children. Money discussions were considered impolite, almost taboo. Besides, I trusted Kathleen. I had raised her to be responsible and honest. If there were real problems, surely she would come to me. That spring, they canceled our annual family vacation to the Oregon coast. A tradition started when the twins were just babies. James cited work commitments, and Kathleen mentioned something vague about tightening their budget. Yet a month later, I saw photos on social media of a weekend trip they took to Las Vegas, staying at an expensive hotel on the Strip. Again, I pushed away my confusion and hurt feelings. Perhaps it was a work event, I reasoned, or maybe they had found a special deal. Despite these subtle changes, I still believed we had the ideal family relationship. I had friends whose adult children rarely called who went months without seeing their grandchildren. I considered myself fortunate and focused on the positive. Whenever doubts crept in, I reminded myself that Kathleen and James were building their own life, as they should be. My role was to support, not to smother. The last truly perfect Sunday dinner we had was for my 70th birthday 2 years ago. They arrived with flowers, a homemade cake the twins had decorated, and a beautiful silver picture frame engraved with World's Best Grandma. We ate, reminisced, and played board games until well past the twins' bedtime. As they left, Kathleen hugged me tight and whispered, "I don't know what we'd do without you, Mom." Those words warmed my heart for weeks afterward. If only I had known then how dramatically everything would change. That Sunday began like any other. I woke early, attended the 8:30 service at First Presbyterian, as I had for 40 years, then stopped by the grocery store to pick up ingredients for dinner. I expected Kathleen to call and cancel as she had the past 3 Sundays, but my phone remained silent. Taking this as a good sign, I prepared their favorite meal, a roast chicken with all the trimmings and even baked chocolate chip cookies, the twins' favorite. At 2:15, a car pulled into my driveway. My heart lifted at the sound, but as I peered through the curtains, I noticed something odd. Kathleen and James were alone. No sign of Jackson or Emma in the back seat. They sat in the car for nearly 5 minutes, appearing to be in intense conversation before finally approaching my front door. When I opened the door, their body language immediately struck me as unusual. Both stood stiffly, their smiles not quite reaching their eyes. Kathleen gave me a quick, formal hug, while James simply nodded. No warm embrace, no "Hey, Mom," or casual banter about the drive over. "Where are the kids?" I asked, looking past them to the empty car. "They are at a birthday party," Kathleen replied, her voice oddly controlled. "We need to talk to you about something, actually." My stomach tightened at her tone, but I smiled and ushered them inside. "Well, come in then. I made chicken and those rolls you love. Are you hungry? And I have fresh coffee? Or would you prefer tea?" "Nothing for me, thanks," James said, settling onto my couch without removing his jacket. Kathleen shook her head as well. "We cannot stay long, Mom." I sat in my armchair across from them, noting how they sat slightly apart from each other, both perched on the edge of the couch, as if ready to flee at any moment. An uncomfortable silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock Richard had restored decades ago. "Is everything okay?" I finally asked. "The kids are doing well." "The kids are fine," Kathleen said, then glanced at James, who gave her a slight nod. She took a deep breath. "Mom, we need to talk to you about something important. We are in a bit of financial trouble." "Financial trouble," I echoed, concern immediately overwhelming my earlier sense of unease. "What kind of trouble, honey?" James cleared his throat. "The dealership made some investments that did not pan out. The economy has been tough on the automotive industry lately. We have accumulated some significant debt," Kathleen continued, her voice steady but her fingers fidgeting with her purse strap. "And we are in danger of losing our house if we cannot come up with the money by the end of the month." My mind raced, trying to process this information. Kathleen and James had always seemed so successful, so put together. "How much are we talking about?" I asked. They exchanged another look before James spoke. "We need $175,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. 175,000. That is a lot of money. Have you spoken to the bank about refinancing, or maybe selling some assets?" "We have tried everything," Kathleen said, a hint of irritation creeping into her voice. "We have exhausted all our options. That is why we have come to you." I took a moment to gather my thoughts. "Sweetie, you know I would help if I could, but I do not have that kind of money. My pension barely covers my expenses, and while I have some savings, it is nowhere near that amount." "What about the house?" James asked, abruptly. "It is paid off right. You could take out a reverse mortgage or sell it. The market in this neighborhood is hot right now." I stared at him, stunned by the suggestion. This house was my security, my home of 40 years filled with memories of Richard and our life together. The thought of losing it sent a wave of panic through me. Sell my house? But where would I live? "You could move in with us," Kathleen suggested, though her tone lacked conviction. "Or find a small apartment. You do not need all this space anyway, Mom." The casual way they discussed uprooting my entire life left me speechless. As I struggled to respond, I noticed James checking his watch impatiently. "Look, Almeda," he said, using my first name as he always did, never comfortable with Mom, or even Mrs. Johnson. "We would not ask if it was not important. This is our home at stake, the twins' stability, our future." I looked at my daughter, searching her face for the empathetic child I had raised. "Kathleen, this is a huge decision. I need time to think about it, to look at my finances and consider my options." Something hardened in her expression then, a look I had never seen directed at me before. "I need the money tomorrow," she said, her voice calm, but entitled as if discussing a small loan she had every right to expect. James nodded in agreement, adding firmly, "And no delays." The room seemed to tilt around me. These were not the words of a daughter in desperate need, but of someone making a demand, expecting compliance without question. In that moment, I saw them clearly for the first time, and the revelation broke my heart. But what could I say? This was my child, my only daughter, sitting before me, asking for help. Despite everything, I loved her. And so, feeling cornered and overwhelmed, I simply replied, "Okay." Relief washed over their faces, quickly replaced by brisk efficiency. James pulled out his phone. "Great. I will text you our account details. The sooner you can wire the funds, the better." Kathleen stood, apparently considering our discussion concluded. "We should go check on the kids. Thanks, Mom. I knew we could count on you." No hugs, No further discussion of how this would impact my life, not even a proper goodbye. They were at the door within minutes, leaving me sitting alone in my living room, the smell of an uneaten dinner filling the house. As their car pulled away, I remained frozen in place, trying to process what had just happened. The daughter, I thought I knew, would never have made such a demand, would have shown concern for my welfare, would have at least acknowledged the magnitude of what she was asking. Something was very wrong beyond just financial troubles, and for the first time in my life, I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about my own child. After Kathleen and James left, I sat motionless in my armchair for nearly an hour, their words replaying in my mind. The house felt suddenly unfamiliar, as if the walls themselves had witnessed a betrayal they could not unsee. Eventually, I roused myself and moved to the kitchen on autopilot, packaging the untouched dinner into containers before calling my neighbor Edith to offer her the food. I could not bear to eat a bite. That night's sleep eluded me. By 3 in the morning, doubt had crystallized into suspicion. Their story did not add up. James had mentioned poor investments at the dealership, but I recalled Kathleen mentioning just last month that business was booming with the new electric vehicle line they had brought in. And while the economy had its challenges, the automotive industry in our area had been relatively stable. More troubling was their behavior. The coldness, the entitlement, the lack of any real explanation for such an enormous debt. $175,000 was not the kind of money one lost through normal business setbacks, at least not at a local car dealership. As dawn broke, I made a decision that went against every maternal instinct I had ever followed. I would investigate before acting. For the first time in our relationship, I would not take Kathleen at her word. I waited until 8:30, then called my old friend, Dorothy Williams. We had taught together for 20 years before her retirement, and now she worked part-time in the accounting department at the same marketing firm where Kathleen held an executive position. I hated involving her, but I needed information. "Dorothy, it is Almeda. I hope I am not calling too early." "Not at all, dear. I have been up for hours. These old bones do not let me sleep in anymore. What can I do for you?" I hesitated, then pressed forward. "I need to ask you something about Kathleen, and I need you to keep it between us." There was a pause on the line. "Of course, Almeda. Is everything all right?" "I am not sure," I admitted. "Kathleen and James came by yesterday asking for a substantial loan. They said they are in financial trouble and might lose their house. Something does not feel right about it." Dorothy's silence spoke volumes before she finally responded. "Well, I probably should not tell you this, but since you are her mother, Kathleen has been talking non-stop about their upcoming vacation. A 2-week Mediterranean cruise next month. Top-tier package, private balcony, the works. She even showed me the brochure in the break room last week." My chest tightened. "A cruise. They are planning. An expensive cruise, while claiming they might lose their house." "And that is not all," Dorothy continued, lowering her voice. "She mentioned they are buying a new car, one of those luxury German models. Said James got a special deal through the dealership." I thanked Dorothy for the information and hung up, my suspicions growing stronger. Still, I needed more. After a quick shower and breakfast I could not taste, I drove to Westside Motors, the dealership where James had worked for the past decade. I parked across the street, gathering my courage before entering. Just inside the showroom, I spotted Lenny Harper, a salesman who had been with the dealership since before James arrived. Lenny had sold us our last car before Richard passed, and always made a point to chat whenever he saw me around town. "Mrs. Johnson, what a surprise. Are you finally trading in that old sedan?" He greeted me warmly. Not today, Lenny. I actually wanted to ask about James. Is he in... Lenny's smile faltered slightly. No, he called in sick today. Third time this month. Between you and me, things have been a bit tense around here lately. I lowered my voice. Tense how I heard there were some investment problems. Lenny looked around before leading me to a quiet corner of the showroom. Investment problems? Is that what he is calling it? Look, I probably should not say anything, but since you are family, the truth is, James has a gambling problem. Started with sports betting a few years back, but it has gotten worse, much worse. The floor seemed to shift beneath my feet. Gambling. Are you certain? Afraid so. He has borrowed money from half the staff here, small amounts at first, but bigger sums recently. Last month, the owner had to have a serious talk with him about using dealership funds for personal expenses. Only reason he was not fired is because of his sales record. And the dealership investments he mentioned. Lenny shook his head. There have not been any major investments beyond our regular inventory. Business has been steady, maybe even better than last year. Whatever financial trouble he is in, it is not because of the dealership. I thanked Lenny and left quickly, my mind reeling. In my car, I sat with my hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to process this new information. My son-in-law had a gambling addiction severe enough that he was risking his job, and my daughter was either enabling him or willfully ignorant. And together, they were planning luxury purchases while asking me to sell my home to cover their debts. Back at home, I began searching more deliberately for answers. I pulled out old photo albums, flipping through images of Kathleen growing up. A pattern emerged that I had never fully acknowledged. Kathleen always got what she wanted. The expensive prom dress when we could barely afford groceries. The study abroad program in England that required a second mortgage on our house. The lavish wedding despite my recent widowhood and strained finances. I had always seen these as signs of my love and devotion, proof that I was a good mother who sacrificed for her child. Now, with painful clarity, I recognized them as stepping stones in a pattern of entitlement I had helped create. I had raised a daughter who believed her wants superseded others' needs, even mine. That evening, I logged into my online banking accounts and tallied my assets. My checking and savings combined held $38,000. My retirement account, which would penalize early withdrawals, contained another $82,000. The house, according to a recent property assessment, might sell for around $200,000 in the current market. All told, if I liquidated everything I owned, I might scrape together just over $320,000. More than enough to cover James's gambling debts. But it would leave me at 72 years old, completely destitute. No home, no savings, dependent entirely on a small pension that barely covered my current modest lifestyle. And for what? To enable more gambling, to fund a Mediterranean cruise and a luxury car. As night fell, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by bank statements, property records, and decades of memories, facing the most painful question a parent can ask. When does love become self-destruction? And with that question came another, even more terrifying. What was I going to do now? Sleep evaded me for a second night. I watched the digital clock on my nightstand tick past each hour, my mind churning with possibilities, none of them painless. By 5:30 in the morning, as the first hint of dawn lightened my bedroom curtains, a plan began to form, one so contrary to everything I had ever done as a mother that it both terrified and exhilarated me. What if I simply left? The thought had appeared unbidden, and my first instinct was to push it away. Good mothers do not abandon their children no matter what. Good mothers sacrifice. Good mothers endure. Good mothers forgive. These beliefs had guided my entire life. But as I lay there watching the room slowly brighten, another voice emerged, quieter but increasingly insistent. Good mothers also teach consequences. Good mothers do not enable destructive behavior. Good mothers sometimes need to practice tough love, and good mothers deserve to protect themselves. By the time I rose to make coffee, my decision was made. I would disappear not forever, but long enough to force Kathleen and James to face their situation without using me as their financial safety net. It would hurt, possibly damage our relationship permanently, but continuing as we were would only perpetuate patterns that were destroying all of us. I moved with surprising efficiency for someone who had barely slept. First, I called my dear friend Grace Parker in Sedona, Arizona. We had been college roommates 50 years ago and had remained close despite the distance. Grace had been inviting me to visit her retirement community for years, promising me my own space in her guest house for as long as I wanted. Almeda. What a lovely surprise to hear from you so early. Grace answered, her voice warm and familiar. Grace, I need to ask you something important. I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Were you serious about me visiting, not just for a weekend, but possibly for an extended stay? There was a brief pause. Of course I was serious. The guest house is yours whenever you want it, for as long as you want. But what is going on? You sound strange. I gave her the condensed version of my situation, excluding the more painful details. By the end of our conversation, it was settled. I would arrive the following day, and Grace promised complete discretion. Next, I called my attorney Harold Greenberg and scheduled an emergency appointment for 10 that morning. Harold had handled Richard's will and had been managing my legal affairs for decades. If anyone could help me navigate this situation legally and ethically, it would be him. With my 2 most important calls completed, I began practical preparations. I retrieved my passport from the fireproof safe in my closet, along with birth certificates, Social Security cards, and other essential documents. From the back of my jewelry box, I took the small key to my safety deposit box at First National Bank. By 9:30, I was at the bank transferring most of my savings to an account only I could access and securing my most valuable items in my safety deposit box. The teller raised an eyebrow at the unusual activity but asked no questions. I withdrew $5,000 in cash, enough for immediate expenses, but not so much as to raise suspicion. At my meeting with Harold, I updated my will with specific instructions regarding my estate. I designated portions for my grandchildren's education placed in trusts that neither Kathleen nor James could access. I outlined conditions for any future financial support I might provide to my daughter and her family. Finally, I gave Harold a sealed letter to be delivered to Kathleen only after 48 hours had passed without contact from me. Almeda, are you sure about this? Harold asked as I signed the last document. It seems rather drastic. I met his concerned gaze. Harold, I have spent my entire life being predictable and accommodating. Perhaps it is time for something drastic. My next stop was the home of my neighbor Martha Washington, a retired nurse who had lived next door for 30 years. I explained that I needed to take an unexpected trip for personal reasons and asked if she would keep an eye on my house. I also entrusted her with a decorative wooden box containing family photographs, my grandmother's pearl necklace that I had always promised to Kathleen, and another letter. If my daughter comes looking for me, please wait 48 hours, then give her this box, I instructed. Not before, no matter what she says. Martha studied my face. her nurse's intuition, clearly sensing the gravity of my request. "You are not in any danger, are you, Almeda?" "Only of losing myself," I replied honestly. Back home, I packed methodically, limiting myself to 2 suitcases, clothes for different weather medications, a few cherished books, and the small photo album containing pictures of Richard Kathleen as a child and the twins. Everything else I could leave behind or replace. My final task was calling a locksmith. By 2 in the afternoon, the locks on all doors had been changed, with Martha holding a spare key for emergencies only. I left my cell phone on the kitchen counter, knowing it could be used to track my whereabouts, and purchased a prepaid phone at the corner store to use until I reached Arizona. At 3:15, exactly 24 hours after Kathleen and James had arrived with their demand, I closed my front door for what might be the last time. The taxi I had called was waiting at the curb. I did not look back as we pulled away, though my heart felt as if it were being torn from my chest. At the airport, I purchased a one-way ticket to Phoenix, using cash. The next available flight departed at 6:40, giving me nearly 3 hours to sit in the terminal questioning and reaffirming my decision in alternating waves of doubt and resolve. As my flight was called and I joined the boarding line, I experienced a moment of profound clarity. This was not just about Kathleen and James and their financial demands. This was about reclaiming my own life, drawing boundaries I should have established decades ago. It was terrifying, yes, but also strangely liberating. As the plane lifted off, carrying me away from the only home I had known for nearly half a century, I closed my eyes and allowed tears to fall freely. I was not running away, I told myself. I was running toward something new: self-respect, hard truths, and perhaps eventually healthier relationships with those I loved. I had no idea what awaited me in Arizona, or what would happen when Kathleen discovered I was gone. But for the first time in years, perhaps for the first time since Richard died, I was making a choice entirely for myself. The mixture of grief and unexpected freedom was dizzying, like stepping off a cliff and discovering mid-fall that perhaps I might fly instead of crash. Grace was waiting for me at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport, her silver hair easily visible in the crowd. Despite being the same age as me, she had always carried herself with a youthful energy I envied. She enveloped me in a warm hug the moment I approached. "Look at you," she said, pulling back to study my face. "Exhausted, but determined. I have always said you had more spine than you let on." The drive to Sedona took about 2 hours, during which Grace chatted about local attractions and her retirement community, carefully avoiding pressing me for details about my situation. The landscape transformed dramatically as we traveled the flat desert, giving way to striking red rock formations that seemed to glow in the setting Sunday. By the time we reached Grace's adobe-style home, nestled against a backdrop of towering red cliffs, darkness had fallen. The guest house was a small but perfectly appointed one-bedroom casita, connected to the main house by a covered walkway. Grace showed me around quickly, sensing my fatigue, then left me with a gentle hug and the promise of coffee in the morning. Alone for the first time since my impulsive decision, the full weight of what I had done crashed over me. I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed and allowed myself to imagine what might be happening back in Portland. By now, Kathleen would have tried calling me multiple times. Perhaps she and James had even driven by the house looking for signs of my presence. Would they be worried or merely annoyed that their financial solution had vanished? The thought of my grandchildren sent a fresh wave of pain through me. Jackson and Emma were innocent in all this. Would they wonder where their grandmother had gone? Would Kathleen tell them the truth, or create some palatable fiction to explain my absence. I barely slept that first night, drifting in and out of troubled dreams filled with images of Kathleen, as a little girl calling for me, her voice growing increasingly desperate as I walked away. I woke before dawn, disoriented, in the unfamiliar room, momentarily forgetting why I was there. Then reality returned, and with it the gnawing doubt about whether I had made a terrible mistake. Grace found me sitting on the small patio outside the guest house, watching the sun paint the red rocks in brilliant orange and gold. "First day of your new adventure," she said, handing me a steaming mug of coffee. "How are you holding up?" "I feel like the worst mother in the world," I admitted, and simultaneously like I should have done this years ago. Grace settled into the chair beside me. "Both those things can be true at once, you know." Over the next few days, I existed in a strange limbo. I would swing between crushing guilt and surprising moments of peace sometimes within the same hour. Grace gave me space but kept me from complete isolation, inviting me for meals and introducing me to a few of her closest friends without explaining the circumstances of my sudden appearance. One week after my arrival, Grace mentioned a support group that met at the community center. "It is for parents of adult children with challenging relationships," she explained carefully. "I thought it might help to talk with others who understand." My first instinct was to refuse. My problems with Kathleen were private family matters, not to be shared with strangers. But isolation was feeding my darkest thoughts, so I reluctantly agreed to attend one session. The group consisted of 8 people, mostly in their 60s and 70s, led by a compassionate therapist named Dr. Rivera. I sat silently through most of that first meeting, listening as others shared stories of adult children with addiction issues, financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, and estrangement. Their pain was palpable, but so was their resilience. They spoke of setting boundaries, without abandoning love of supporting, without enabling of the ongoing struggle to find balance. Near the end of the session, a man named Howard, a retired accountant with kind eyes and a soft-spoken manner, shared his experience with a son who had systematically drained his retirement funds over several years. "I kept giving because I thought that is what fathers do," Howard explained. "I enabled his addiction and destroyed my own security because I confused love with never saying no. The hardest thing I ever did was changing my phone number and moving without telling him. It felt like cutting off my own arm. But 6 months later, when he showed up at my brother's house looking for me, he was sober for the first time in years. Sometimes disappearing is the only gift we can give." His words resonated so deeply that I found myself returning to the group the following week and the week after that. Gradually, I shared my own story, receiving not the judgment I feared, but understanding and gentle guidance. Through these sessions, I began to recognize patterns in my relationship with Kathleen that had roots going back to her childhood ways I had inadvertently taught her, that my needs were secondary, my resources always available, my boundaries flexible to the point of non-existence. As weeks turned into a month, I established a routine in Sedona. Mornings began with coffee on the patio, watching the light change on the red rocks. 3 days a week, I volunteered at the local library shelving books and occasionally helping with children's story hour, finding comfort in the familiar world of literature. I attended the support group every Thursday evening and began one-on-one sessions with Dr. Rivera every other Tuesday. I also rediscovered writing, something I had loved before marriage and motherhood consumed my time. Each afternoon I would sit with a notebook, pouring out memories, reflections, and eventually letters to Kathleen that I never intended to send. The act of putting words on paper helped me process the complex emotions swirling within me, clarifying my thoughts in a way that mere thinking never could. Through therapy and the support group, I confronted uncomfortable truths about my role in creating the dynamics that had led to this crisis. I had raised Kathleen to expect rescue to see me as a resource rather than a person with my own needs and limits. My constant sacrifices, which I had viewed as expressions of maternal love, had unintentionally taught her that my purpose was to serve her interests regardless of the cost to myself. This realization was painful but ultimately liberating. If I had participated in creating these patterns, I could also participate in changing them. This shift in perspective transformed my disappearance from an act of desperate flight to the first step in establishing healthier boundaries. 2 months into my stay in Arizona, Grace introduced me to her weekly hiking group, 5 women near my age, who explored the gentler trails around Sedona. Initially hesitant, I soon found unexpected joy in these excursions. The physical exertion cleared my mind, while the breathtaking landscapes offered perspective on my problems. Standing beside ancient rock formations that had weathered millennia of storms, my personal troubles seemed less overwhelming, more manageable in the grand scheme of existence. Through it all, I maintained minimal contact with my former life. Martha sent occasional emails to my new address reporting that my house remained secure and that Kathleen had indeed come looking for me multiple times, growing increasingly frantic as days passed without contact. She had received the box as instructed and apparently opened it immediately on her doorstep, her expression crumpling as she read my letter. I had written to her explaining that I needed time away to reconsider our relationship, that I knew about James's gambling and their planned luxury purchases, and that I would not be providing financial assistance. I assured her of my love, but made it clear that I was establishing boundaries that should have been in place long ago. I had given Martha strict instructions not to reveal my whereabouts, and my neighbor honored this request, despite what she described as quite a dramatic scene when Kathleen demanded information. According to Martha, James had appeared on my doorstep separately, his manner less distraught than calculating, as he asked pointed questions about my financial arrangements and when I might return. Harold, my attorney, also provided updates, confirming that the letter and updated will had been properly delivered and that all legal protections were in place. He reported that Kathleen had contacted him, alternating between tearful pleas and angry demands for information about my assets. He had maintained professional distance while ensuring her that I was safe but unwilling to communicate directly at present. These reports often sent me spiraling back into guilt and doubt, but Dr. Rivera helped me recognize these feelings without being consumed by them. Guilt is the price of growth for those who have spent their lives as caretakers, she told me, during one particularly difficult session. It does not mean you are making the wrong choice. It means you are making a different choice than the one your patterns would dictate. By the beginning of my 3rd month in Sedona, something unexpected had happened. I had begun to rediscover myself, not just as Kathleen's mother or Richard's widow, or even as the reliable English teacher I had been for decades, but as Almeda Johnson, a woman with her own desires, interests, and yes, boundaries. The pain of separation remained, but alongside it grew a tentative sense of possibility. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time ever, I was living according to my own needs rather than in response to others' expectations. This transformation did not erase my love for my daughter or my grandchildren. If anything, the distance clarified the depth of that love, separating it from the unhealthy patterns that had distorted our relationship. I still ached to see Jackson and Emma, to know how they were coping, to assure them of my continued presence in their lives. But I also recognized that returning to my previous role would serve none of us in the long run. As spring blossomed in the desert, bringing unexpected bursts of color to the rugged landscape, I began to consider what reconciliation might look like, not as a return to old patterns, but as the establishment of a new, healthier connection, based on mutual respect rather than dependence and enablement. I was not ready yet, but for the first time since leaving Portland, I could imagine a future that included Kathleen and her family, albeit on very different terms than before. The woman who had fled in the night, terrified and heartbroken, was gradually being replaced by someone stronger, clearer, and more grounded in her own worth. It was a painful metamorphosis, but as Dr. Rivera often reminded me, the most important growth rarely happens in comfort zones. 3 months and 12 days after my departure, an email arrived from an address I instantly recognized. My heart raced as I stared at Kathleen's name in my inbox, her message titled, simply, Mom. For several minutes, I could not bring myself to open it, afraid of what I might find, of the pain it might rekindle, just as I was finding my balance. When I finally gathered my courage and clicked on the email, the words on the screen swung between accusations and desperate pleas. Kathleen wrote that my disappearance had destroyed their lives, that I had abandoned my family when they needed me most. She revealed that James's gambling debts had been worse than I imagined, involving loans from people who did not take kindly to late payments. They had been forced to sell their house and move into a small apartment. The twins were sharing a bedroom for the first time and were traumatized by the sudden downgrade in their living situation. "How could you just vanish like that?" she wrote. "After everything we have been through together, the kids ask about you every day, and I do not know what to tell them. Did you ever think about how this would affect them? Did you ever think about anyone but yourself?" The email concluded with a direct request. "We need you to come home now. We need to talk about how to move forward as a family. Please, Mom. Whatever point you were trying to make, you have made it. Now come back and help us fix this mess." My immediate reaction was a crushing wave of guilt. Images of my grandchildren, confused and uprooted, filled my mind. Had I been selfish? Had my actions caused more harm than good? I forwarded the email to Dr. Rivera asking for an emergency session that afternoon. "This is actually progress," Dr. Rivera said, after reading the message carefully. "Kathleen is communicating directly rather than just trying to locate you through others. And notice that while she is certainly trying to provoke your guilt, she is also acknowledging that the family situation has changed. The question is, how do you want to respond?" We spent the hour discussing options. I could maintain silence, which might reinforce boundaries, but also potentially damage any chance of reconciliation. I could return immediately, which would likely result in falling back into established patterns. Or I could engage from a distance, beginning a dialogue while maintaining the space I needed to preserve my newfound strength. After careful consideration and consultation with my support group, I decided on the third option. Rather than replying by email, I would suggest a video call, allowing for real-time conversation while keeping physical distance. I sent a brief response. "Kathleen, I am ready to talk. I suggest a video call this Saturday at 11, your time. Please have James join as well. I love you and the twins, but we have much to discuss before I make any decisions about returning." The next 3 days passed with excruciating slowness. I prepared for the conversation with the help of Dr. Rivera, identifying key points I wanted to make and boundaries I needed to establish. I wrote them down in clear, simple statements, knowing that emotional reactions might make it difficult to express myself clearly in the moment. When Saturday arrived, I set up my laptop in Grace's home office, which she had generously offered for privacy. The room was bright and airy, with views of the red rocks providing a calming backdrop. I dressed carefully in a blue blouse that Richard had always said brought out my eyes wanting to project calm confidence rather than the anxiety churning inside me. At precisely 11:03, the video call notification appeared on my screen. I took a deep breath and clicked accept. Kathleen's face filled the screen, her expression a mixture of relief and resentment. She looked tired with dark circles under her eyes, and her hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail rather than her usual perfect styling. "Mom," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "you actually answered." "I said I would," I replied gently. "Is James with you?" She nodded and adjusted the camera to include him sitting beside her. He looked worse than Kathleen, his face gaunt and his normally immaculate appearance disheveled. He nodded curtly but did not speak. "Where are you?" Kathleen demanded immediately. "Everyone has been worried sick. We filed a missing person report. We thought something terrible had happened to you." "I am safe," I said deliberately, not revealing my location. I left a letter explaining that I was taking some time away. "I am sorry if that caused you and the children worry, but I needed space to think." "To think?" James interjected, his voice sharp. "You disappeared without a word, right when we were in a financial crisis. Do you have any idea what we have been going through?" I met his gaze steadily through the screen. "I think I do, James. I know about the gambling debts. I know about the loans from dangerous people. I know about the planned cruise and the new car. I know that you were not honest with me about why you needed that money." Their expressions confirmed everything before they could deny it. Kathleen's face flushed with anger, while James looked away, unable to maintain eye contact. "Who told you?" Kathleen demanded. "Was it someone from the dealership? They had no right to discuss our personal business?" "It does not matter how I know," I said calmly. "What matters is that you came to me with a manipulative story expecting me to sell my home and give you my life savings without full transparency." "We were desperate," James shouted suddenly, animated. "Those people were threatening us. What were we supposed to do?" "You could have told me the truth," I replied. "You could have asked for help addressing the real problem, not just money to make it temporarily disappear. You could have treated me as a person worthy of honesty, not just a financial resource to be drained." Kathleen's expression hardened. "So you just ran away? After all the times you said you would always be there for me? After all your talk about unconditional love and family coming first, you abandoned us when things got difficult?" Her words struck deep, hitting the very doubts I had been wrestling with for months. But therapy and my support group had prepared me for this moment. I took another steadying breath. "I did not abandon you, Kathleen. I removed myself from a situation that had become harmful to all of us. I have spent these months working to understand my part in creating a relationship where you feel entitled to my resources without regard for my well-being. That is not healthy for either of us." "Oh, so this is some kind of lesson," she scoffed. "Tough love from Mother Dearest." "No, it is self-preservation," I said quietly. "And yes, perhaps a lesson, but one I needed to learn as much as you did." The conversation continued in this vein for nearly an hour. James alternated between anger-attempted manipulation and brief moments of something that might have been genuine remorse. Kathleen cycled through accusations, tears, and occasional glimpses of the daughter I had raised. I maintained as much calm as I could, though tears flowed freely at several points. Gradually, as emotional outbursts exhausted themselves, we began to discuss practical matters. I explained that I would not be providing cash directly to them under any circumstances, but I was willing to help in other ways. I offered to pay for addiction counseling for James and to contribute directly to the children's education and necessary expenses. I made it clear that any financial support would come with conditions and accountability. "So, you are punishing us," Kathleen said bitterly, "making us jump through hoops, like children." "No," I corrected her. "I am offering appropriate help that addresses the real issues rather than enabling destructive patterns. There is a difference." As the call neared its conclusion, Kathleen's anger seemed to deflate somewhat. In a quieter voice, she asked, "Are you ever coming home?" The question hung between us, loaded with implications. Home. The concept had shifted for me over these months away. Portland was still home in many ways, but I had also found unexpected belonging in Sedona in the person I was becoming here. "I do not know yet," I answered honestly. "I need more time, and things would need to be different if I did." James abruptly stood and walked off camera, clearly dissatisfied with the conversation's outcome. Kathleen watched him go, then turned back to me with an expression I could not quite read. "The kids miss you," she said, a final attempt at leveraging my greatest vulnerability. "I miss them too more than I can express," I replied, my voice breaking slightly. "Please tell them I love them and think of them every day. Perhaps we could arrange a video call with them next week." She nodded reluctantly, and we made tentative arrangements before ending the call. As the screen went dark, I sat motionless, emotionally drained yet somehow lighter, as if a weight I had carried for decades had begun ever so slightly to lift from my shoulders. The conversation had been painful, messy, and incomplete, but it was a beginning, a first tentative step toward whatever new relationship might be possible. That night, I sat on the patio, watching stars emerge in the desert sky, reflecting on how far I had come and the uncertain road ahead. There were no easy answers, no perfect resolutions that would erase the pain on all sides. But for the first time I had spoken my truth, without apology, had articulated my needs without diminishing their importance, had stood firm in the face of emotional manipulation. It was a small victory, perhaps, but a significant one for a woman who had spent a lifetime placing herself last. Whatever came next, I knew with quiet certainty that I would never return to being the person I was before the perpetual giver with invisible boundaries. That Almeda was gone, transformed by pain and distance, into someone stronger, clearer, and finally worthy of her own protection. 6 months after my abrupt departure from Portland, I found myself standing once again on the doorstep of my own home, key in hand, heart pounding with apprehension. The neighborhood looked exactly as I had left it down to Mrs. Garcia's meticulously maintained rose bushes across the street. Yet I felt like a visitor from another world, returning to a familiar landscape with entirely new eyes. I had come back to Portland temporarily, not to resume my old life, but to resolve practical matters. My house needed attention after months of vacancy, and I had appointments with Harold to finalize changes to my financial arrangements. But the real purpose of my return was more personal. I had agreed to meet with Kathleen and the twins at a neutral location, our first face-to-face contact since my disappearance. Inside the house felt smaller than I remembered, filled with memories both sweet and painful. I ran my fingers along the back of Richard's favorite armchair, wondering what he would make of all that had happened. Would he be proud of my newfound strength, or disappointed in the fractures within our family? Perhaps both. I decided just as I carried both these feelings simultaneously. Martha had kept the house in good order, collecting mail and checking for any issues during my absence. She greeted me with a warm hug and an update on neighborhood happenings, carefully avoiding mention of Kathleen until I brought it up myself. "She has stopped coming by so often," Martha reported. "But when she does, she seems different. Less demanding, more reflective. She actually asked me about my hip replacement last time, which never would have happened before." This small sign of change gave me hope as I prepared for our meeting the following day. We had agreed to meet at Peninsula Park, where the rose garden would be in full bloom and the twins could play if tensions rose between adults. I slept poorly that night, rehearsing possible conversations in my mind, until dawn painted my bedroom ceiling with soft light. The park was busy with weekend visitors when I arrived. Families spread on blankets, and children racing across open spaces. I spotted them immediately. Kathleen sitting on a bench near the playground, watching Jackson and Emma scale the climbing structure. She wore sunglasses despite the cloudy day, perhaps to hide signs of emotion. The twins saw me first. Emma's shriek of "Grandma" carried across the park, followed by the thunder of small feet as both children raced toward me. I knelt to receive their impact, their small arms wrapping around my neck with fierce intensity. Tears sprang to my eyes as I breathed in their familiar scents, mingled now with the traces of unfamiliar soap and shampoo from their new home. "We thought you went to heaven like Grandpa Jackson," whispered against my hair. "No, sweetheart," I murmured. "Grandma just needed some time to herself. But I have missed you terribly." Kathleen approached more slowly, her body language uncertain. When the children finally released me, I stood to face my daughter, searching her expression for clues to her state of mind. She removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes, rimmed with fatigue, but clear and direct in their gaze. "Mom," she said simply then, stepped forward for a brief, awkward hug. We settled on a bench while the twins returned to the playground, staying within sight, but giving us adult space to talk. For several minutes we observed them in silence, commenting occasionally on how they had grown or a particularly impressive feat of climbing. Finally, Kathleen spoke. "James moved out last month." I turned to her surprised. "I am sorry to hear that." She shrugged a gesture that attempted nonchalance, but failed to disguise the pain beneath. "It was my decision, actually. After our video call, I started asking more questions about our finances. He had taken loans against the kids' college funds without telling me. That was the final straw. "Is he getting help?" I asked. "He started treatment for gambling addiction. Part of his motivation is that I told him he cannot see the kids unsupervised until he has completed the program and shown real change." She twisted her wedding ring still on her finger, despite the separation. "I do not know if our marriage will survive, but at least he is finally addressing the real problem." I nodded, respecting her difficult decision. "And how are you managing?" "It is hard," she admitted. "I found a better paying position at a different firm, and we are stable in the apartment, but it is a big adjustment for all of us. The twins miss their old house, their old school. They miss you." "And I miss them," I said softly. "I never wanted to hurt them, Kathleen. That was the hardest part of leaving." She was quiet for a moment, watching her children play. "Why did you not just tell me no? You could have refused to give us the money without disappearing." It was the question I had anticipated, the one I had prepared for with Dr. Rivera's help. Would you have accepted that answer? Or would you have continued to pressure me using guilt and emotional manipulation until I gave in as I always had before? Her silence was answer enough. I needed to break a pattern that was harming both of us. I continued gently. "You needed to learn that I am a person with my own needs and boundaries, not just an extension of your needs. And I needed to learn that saying no to you does not make me a bad mother. Kathleen's eyes filled with tears. I never saw it that way. I always knew you would be there, would do anything for me. I took that for granted. I know, I said, and that is partly my responsibility. I taught you to expect that by never establishing healthy limits. Our conversation continued as the afternoon progressed, touching on painful truths, but also on possibilities for a new kind of relationship. I explained my decision to sell the Portland house, a choice that no longer felt like capitulation, but like a positive step toward my own future. I had already found a small condo in Sedona that would become my primary residence, but I planned to rent a small apartment in Portland for part of each year to maintain connections with my grandchildren. I am establishing trusts for Jackson and Emma's education, I told her, money that cannot be accessed for any other purpose. And I am willing to help with their expenses directly, school supplies, clothes, extracurricular activities. But I will not provide cash directly to you or James anymore. Rather than the resentment I might have expected months ago, Kathleen nodded with understanding. That is more than fair, and probably healthier for all of us. As the sun began to lower in the sky, we called the twins over and walked together to a nearby ice cream shop, a small attempt at normalizing our relationship. Watching them excitedly select flavors and toppings, I felt a bittersweet mixture of joy at being with them and awareness of all the moments I had missed during my absence. "Will you come back and live with us?" Grandma Emma asked, as we sat at a small table, ice cream dripping down her fingers despite the napkin I had tucked around her hand. "No, sweetheart," I answered truthfully. "Grandma has her own home now, but I will visit often, and you can come see me too on special trips." "Because you and Mommy had a fight?" Jackson asked, with the directness only children can manage. Kathleen and I exchanged glances. "We had some disagreements," I explained carefully. "But we are working on understanding each other better now. Sometimes people need space to figure things out, but that does not mean they stop loving each other." The following weeks were filled with practical arrangements. I finalized the sale of my Portland house, finding unexpected peace in letting go of a space filled with both treasured memories and recent pain. I secured a small one-bedroom apartment that would serve as my part-time residence during visits, signing a flexible lease that would allow me to spend 3 months of each year near my grandchildren. Most importantly, Kathleen and I established new patterns of communication and boundaries. We began weekly video calls with the twins, creating a rhythm of connection despite the physical distance. She respected my decision not to provide financial bailouts while accepting my direct support for the children's needs. I respected her journey toward independence and her difficult decisions regarding her marriage to James. Our relationship remained fragile, a delicate reconstruction after significant damage. There were still moments of tension, misunderstandings, and occasional slides into old patterns that required gentle correction. But beneath the ongoing work of rebuilding trust lay a foundation of greater honesty and mutual respect than had existed before. By the time I returned to Sedona, settling into my newly purchased condo, with its breathtaking views of red rock formations, I carried with me not just souvenirs for Grace and my support group friends, but also a handmade card from my grandchildren. Inside, in Jackson's careful printing, were the words, "We love you even when you are far away." Those simple words encapsulated the most profound lesson of my journey, that true love exists not in unlimited giving or unbounded sacrifice, but in the healthy space between people who respect each other's separate identities and needs. My disappearing act had been dramatic, perhaps even traumatic for those involved, but it had created the rupture necessary for genuine healing to begin. In the desert evening, sitting on my small balcony, watching the setting sun paint the red rocks in hues of fire and gold, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought me here. At 72, I had finally learned to value myself as much as I valued others, to set boundaries without abandoning love, to distinguish between generosity and martyrdom. The road ahead would not be easy. Relationships, damaged by decades of unhealthy patterns, are not healed in months or even years. James continued his treatment with uncertain results. Kathleen faced the challenges of single parenthood and financial recovery. The twins would carry the impact of these tumultuous changes in ways we could not yet predict. And Almeda Johnson, former high school literature teacher, widow, mother, and grandmother, would continue my own journey of self-discovery and healing. I would balance time between two homes, between independence and family connection, between setting boundaries and offering genuine support. But for perhaps the first time in my life, I faced this complex future with confidence in my own worth and clarity about my own needs. The pain of transformation had been necessary, the distance essential for perspective. Like the desert plants surrounding my new home, I had found strength through harsh conditions, blossoming not despite the challenges, but because of them. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice that hurt someone you loved in order to ultimately help them? What boundaries have you established in your own family relationships? I would love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that it is never too late to stand up for yourself. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the most loving thing we can do both for others and for ourselves is to say no.